But in the 20th century, beginning especially abroad, and at a later date in this country, a very different concept, a very different ideal has begun to emerge. That is the ideal that everyone should be equal in income, in level of living, in what he has. The idea that the economic race should be so arranged that everybody ends at the finish line at the same time, rather than that everyone starts at the beginning line at the same time. This concept raises a very serious problem for freedom. It is clearly in conflict with it, since it requires that the freedom of some be restricted in order to provide greater benefits to others. The society that puts equality before freedom will end up with neither. The society that puts freedom before equality will end up with a great measure of both.
And it would, seems to me, be possible to redistribute wealth.
But is it a good idea to redistribute wealth?
It is possible to redistribute wealth. The question is whether in the process of distributing wealth, you don't inevitably accompany it by side effects, which have the characteristic that they make things worse rather than better. Because what happens every time you go to redistribute wealth, you establish a pie there for somebody to grab. And there are lots of people around trying to grab them. And they are going to go down to Washington or to the State House or wherever it is and work and try to convert that program into one which, although it started out fine, almost all of these welfare programs that you and I now regard as having bad effects started out fine. The new broom sweeps clean.
I wouldn't necessarily concede that every welfare program we have now has entirely bad effects.
Doesn't have an entirely bad effect.
Or even primarily bad effects.
Well, name one, which on the whole...
the Head Start program is a great success. Now, does that come under, maybe that comes under your category of equality of opportunity rather than equality of result. But nevertheless, it is a major government program that is taking tax money and spending it on poor people.
I think that if you're going to say the government should do things of that sort to help people to help themselves to rise up and meet some standards, whatever the theoretical objections might be to it, I think that the political objections are relatively minor, that very few people would argue against that. The polls that I've seen suggest that almost every segment of the society would support it. Now,
then why is it that even today, 20 years or 25 years after it started, Head Start is only available to a small fraction of the people who qualify for it?
Thank you. That's our whole point. Because that isn't the kind of program that can get political support. That isn't the kind of program that brings the fancy paid lobbyists down to Washington. But no, if you look at what government spends, look at what government spends, and ask yourself how much of it can be characterized as being spent for purposes that you would regard as desirable.